What's going on, everybody? Mike Singer of blueandgold.com, joined by our senior editor, Lou Somogyi, and our football analyst, Mike Goolsby, who, of course, is a former Fighting Irish linebacker back in the early 2000s. Sorry, Mike, I shouldn't say back in the – that probably makes you feel a little old, but no, it wasn't just a distant memory.
My body makes me feel old, Mike, not you.
Well, as we are on this YouTube Zoom podcast, you're showing the guns there, so you're good shape. You were at the gym before we started recording, so I was at a fast food restaurant. So,
well, different strokes, Mike.
That's right. So to start off the podcast, we're going to discuss Notre Dame's new offensive tackle commit, Joe Alt. 6'7", 255, 260 from the Minnesota area. Interesting commitment, Mike. Player who was basically a sixth offensive lineman for his high school last year, and caught about 17 passes. So again, he's pretty much just used as a sixth offensive lineman at the end. And I think he played last year at about 230, and he's already beefed up 35, 40 pounds this off season. His father is John Alt, two-time Pro Bowler for the Kansas City Chiefs, played 9 years, I want to say there. So his oldest brother plays in the NHL with the Colorado Avalanche organization. So really interesting bloodlines, really interesting prospect in general, considering, again, a tight end turned offensive tackle. Those guys are typically pretty boom or bust in terms of that high ceiling. But again, if you're going from 230 to 300 in 18 months, 24 months, that's quite the big jump.
We'll spit those numbers out again, Mike, going from what to what?
So last fall, he played at 230.
Okay.
So for him to play offensive tackle at Notre Dame, 300, right? Right around there?
Well, sure. Yeah. Again, generically speaking, sure.
So for him, that's quite a big jump on somebody.
It happened, yeah. So when you said you used the term, it's an interesting commit, is what you said. So the question was, what makes it interesting that he doesn't have a defined position as of right now? Or
well, he's never played offensive tackle. I mean, he's played. Again, it's basically an extension of a tackle, but he's just an intriguing take all around, from his bloodlines to he's a tight end. I mean, even still on his Rivals page right now, he's listed as a tight end. So bloodlines, that. His recruiting process was interesting. He didn't get his first offer until, I want to say, November. So 8 offers in total, but all from Power 5 schools. Dad played at Iowa. Minnesota's the local school, and he picks Notre Dame, a school that he's visited once, and that was just a few weeks ago, so we couldn't even see the coaches. So it was just he's never talked to the coaches in person. So again, all around, intriguing may be a better word than interesting.
Yeah, I get it. I think it's been done before. Like, I was just writing down some notes. Who's the tackle in the NFL currently? Right tackle Lane Johnson, who came into, I think he went to Texas A&M, came into Texas A&M as a quarterback out of high school. Jason Peters, who's arguably the best left tackle in football, he converted from a tight end. And I even think Trent Williams was a tight end, and he's another fantastic left tackle for what was the Redskins, and he formerly played for them. We'll get to some of that maybe later, guys. But yeah, there is a blueprint. It's been done before. It does beg the question, though, if his father was a postal worker, would he have the 8 offers that he does, right? So that's the interesting thing, is how much weight does that bloodline carry? I know Notre Dame, Lou, you could speak to this. Like recently, there's been a lot of like ex-NFL, ex-athlete guys whose sons go on to play for the Irish. Like obviously Corey Robinson was one. Philip Daniels, his kid, came here to play. I think there was like 3 or 4 of them kind of in a run.
Yeah. Well, not only that, Mike, but you listed a bunch of NFL guys. Notre Dame has a long history of tight ends moving to offensive tackle. I think you played with Mark LaVore.
I was just going to mention Mark LaVore. Yeah, and he had
there's
he
Mike
played for
Gandy.
6. Yeah.
Mike Gandy had an 8-year career in the NFL. Luke Pettigrew was a first-round pick. Good trivia question, too. He fell asleep at the first team meeting with Lou Holtz as a freshman, but became a first-round pick. But Andy Heck, captain of the 1988 championships. Tom Rader, George Coons, an 8-time Pro Bowl pick. There is a long, long history. And we talk about defensively where you like to take corners and make them into safeties, safeties into rovers, linebackers into defensive ends. It's the same principle offensively here is you take that athletic tight end, and, man, if you can make him to a left tackle and you've got the bloodlines and the size to do it.
Yeah, and I think we know that, Notre Dame is going to use a lot of 12 personnel into the future. So as he's progressing, as that weight is going onto his frame, and hopefully it's, good weight. It's just not getting heavy for the sake of getting heavy. But, he could be a useful tight end and as a second or third tight end. And then as he completes that transition into a tackle down the road. But I'll tell you, there's a kid I train here in town. He's going to South Dakota State from Western Nebraska, small town. His name's Wyatt Segren. Wyatt's 6'6", 6'7", long arms, and he's projected to be a tackle. But he played basketball, right? And then when his basketball season was done, he put on 20 pounds in like 3 weeks like that, just from like the reduction in activity. And then another kid that just kind of comes to mind when we're just talking about the intriguing aspects of this kid is like Ryan Harris, who's also a Minnesota kid. Ryan Harris started as a true freshman at like 278 or something.
I think it was 265.
And he had and I love Ryan, who's like what he's doing now, like listening, he's again, one of those guys that like, you're like, man, I respect the hell out of Ryan Harris, but he had a bad body too. It wasn't even like he was light. He just had a bad body, but he had great hands and great technique. And as anybody that's played, and the higher you go, the technique wins. So he has no bad habits as an offensive tackle right now. He's a moldable, ball of clay. So it's exciting. I do think for any kid that if he's truly 6'7", any kid that's 6'7", 230 on his tape, I thought he could have been a little bit more dominant just at the point of attack. He kind of eventually sort of washes people over just due to his size. So I trust the schools that offered him. I trust the bloodlines. He's got great feet. He's got soft hands. So I project him as a usable tight end in the next couple of years. And I have no qualms or concerns that he'll be able to put that weight on. I mean, Justin Tuck, Lou, again, just a genetic freak, but Justin Tuck came in and reported at 218 pounds and left 3 years later at 272 with a six-pack. So that the weight, that's not a concern. Truly, it really isn't.
Yeah, you get into
most of our listeners have probably put on 40 pounds like themselves. So it's like, it's not hard to put weight on, so.
And you mentioned the basketball background too. Mike McGlinchey, fabulous basketball player in high school, but he also played like fullback, a number of positions. He could have been a quarterback if you ever saw him throw, but he came in at about 280, and you could see he could put on 40 pounds and still look light. Mm-hmm. Ronnie Stanley, another basketball type player. These are first rounders. So Joe Staley, who Brian Kelly coached, even similar like that. That seems to be really the prototype of what you want to see in your tackles.
Get athletes, again, body types, you get athletes, long arms, and then, you roll the dice. Again, I don't think, and this is, Mike, you get into this a lot with recruiting, but some of these 5-star kids, I sometimes think like the chip falls off their shoulder a little bit. They've already arrived, and they're essentially can be sort of looked at as a finished product. Mm-hmm. So why not take a kid with upside? Sure. And again, there's a bloodline there.
So with Notre Dame offensive tackle recruiting, they landed Blake Fisher really early in the process, and then their second offensive lineman in the 2021 class is Pat Coogan, who they're expected to have as a center or a guard. So they really wanted one more tackle. They struck out on some guys. Caleb Johnson from Ocala, Florida, committed to Auburn. You had Wyatt Millum, committed to West Virginia. There's a couple other guys who Steph really targeted and coveted, and just for various reasons didn't work out. So they turned to someone like Alt as that plan B type guy. So do you like that take? I mean, if you're gonna take somebody that's not your first choice, getting a guy who could become better than your first choices because of all these reasons that we've talked about does seem like a pretty good take for Notre Dame.
Yeah, and I think perception's reality. So if that's, I like that take. I do. You swing for upside. It's like it's your 4th or 5th or 6th round pick. It's like, it's always like with football. This is a phrase that I think I've coined, but it's potential versus production. It's like, so even like you'll see guys go high in the draft in the NFL. I'm like, man, they weren't that productive, but a coach can see the potential, and then with their ego, etc., they're like, well, I'll develop this guy into a player, and either it happens or it doesn't. But he's got a lot of potential. So oftentimes from a coach's eyes, that carries more weight than, again, production, or in this case, an extra 40 pounds or whatever. Again, the weight doesn't concern me at all. He's got good feet. He's got soft hands. And again, some of the best tackles in football were tight ends. It just grew into their body. So
at worst, Notre Dame has a big tight end who just blocks a lot and is good on special teams.
Perfect. Yeah. And shoot, man, those guys play for a long time too. Like if that guy finds himself in the NFL, there's always a use for a guy that's a third tight end that's a decent special teams guy. So yeah, I like the commit.
Good to close the book on Joe Alt for the podcast, and we've got a few other things to talk about, my friends. So first, let's hear from our sponsors at TradeLast, which is a Notre Dame Idea Center startup that has pivoted its business model to a not-for-profit initiative to serve the medical responders, selflessly sacrificing themselves during the crisis. They're doing so by providing free vacations post-crisis for the responders so that they can recover from the trauma that they have experienced and reconnect with their families. Please consider helping this important initiative started by Notre Dame alums and staffed by Notre Dame student volunteers by visiting their website, tradelasts.com, and donating time in your second home, spreading word to others, or supporting their GoFundMe page. Again, that's tradelasts.com. Thank you for supporting this deserving Notre Dame initiative. So we always like to start these podcasts with talking about new commitments for Notre Dame. Seems like every couple of weeks, Fighting Irish have a new commit. So get Goolsby's take there, and then we talk about some hot topics. And there's plenty of those to go around right now. Let's start with, and just asking this kind of open-ended question will lead us to interesting places, I'm sure. But what is realistic moving forward? What are you guys thinking is going to happen this fall?
I've maintained pretty much since, I would say starting in June, when you started seeing more closures, that I could envision football starting, maybe not necessarily on time. I'm just not sure about whether it would finish. I could see something where there's an outbreak that occurs suddenly and there's a panic that takes over, and it could be similar to what you saw with the conference tournaments in basketball. One day you're playing, and then the next day on the back of the bus, season's over, guys. So if I had to bet, I could see the season starting, because there's going to be a tremendous effort to try to make it happen. I just think all bets are off once it does start.
You read that article by Yahoo Sports and Pete Thamel, and that it's hard to read that. I don't know if you got to see it, Mike. I know you did, Lou. It's hard to read that article with, I believe is an athletic director, multiple Power 5 coaches, TV executives. It's hard to read that and be excited about the possibility of a season.
So I didn't read that, Mike, but what is the tenor of that group of people? How do they feel about it?
Lou, I'll let you answer that one.
It's basically that you're not going to have a vaccine till later on, that even in 2021, there's going to be a question mark, never mind 2020, because of what we talked about, and John Harbaugh about a month ago talked about that it's humanly impossible to fulfill all the protocols of, okay, let's socially distance, let's do this and this, but for about 3 hours on a football field, let's have 22 guys just pounding and tackling, hitting in close proximity, and not only just games but practices. That it's unrealistic to believe.
So, but what I'm asking though, did those coaches, did those ADs that were interviewed, did they seem like they wanted to play, or were they were skeptical?
Yeah, they were skeptical that it was going to be able to be pulled off.
I just think, the virus is a real thing, and there's inherent risks with walking outside your front door, and this is just one of them. It is like, so it's like, it's not like it's a plague. It's not like people are dropping dead. So it's like, yeah, some kids might get sick, and then it is what it is. Like, it's just part of the game. So that's just my take on it. And like you mentioned the word panic, Lou, it's like, where's the panic? If you have, like, what's the root of the panic? Is the panic what you're seeing on TV? Or if you didn't know that the virus existed, like, you wouldn't be panicked about it because nothing would change. You're not noticing anything. Like, your neighbors aren't dying. You understand what I'm saying? If you just went about your day and you never knew the virus existed, you would never knew it existed. But we hear about it over and over and over and over again. And I think some people are choosing to panic. Yeah, with air quotes. So that's the worrisome, the bothersome part to me is like, okay, you could have gotten I hate to use you could have got the flu, but like, you sweat on each other. You share soap in the shower. You share hot tubs. You share water bottles. Like, you share everything. Those are your teammates. That's your, I don't know. But I do think that the world right now needs sports, and that's the part that's like the saddest to me. It's sad for the kids and the team, but it's sad for people need something to look forward to, and that's the most bothersome part to me when it comes to this particular conversation as it pertains to the virus. Well, football is good for the country. Yeah. You can't have everybody locked up in their house panicking. I don't know.
But you're already seeing, I know that for many, the Ivy League and Patriot League don't count, but they're delaying until January. The Pac-12, the Big Ten, they're gone the direction. We're going to play conference only. A lot of high schools, it looks like, are.
Who's making that decision?
Those are state decisions, usually.
Sure.
Because there's going to be some pockets of the country that are going to be worse than other. Virginia, I think, lockdown. New Jersey, I think they won't have football, to my knowledge, unless they're around. California, it's really doubtful right now, and you know how big football is in California.
Well, I know the state of California too, in terms of, like, give me a break. I don't know, man, and I just think, again, this is over what? There's 370 million people here. 100,000 plus died. How many of those were over 80 years old? Like, somebody needs to really just honestly look at it. Like, Lou Holtz kind of kicked the can down the road a little bit, but it's like, again, most of these people that are dying are elderly. Yes, it's a real thing. Yes, you can get sick. The likelihood of you dying, again, people just need to get it through their head. Like, these kids it's not certain death if you get this virus. It's just not. So I do think that the reaction is a little bit overblown. From a state's perspective, from any sort of institutional perspective, I think that it's a lot of covering your ass. I got to cover my ass.
When you're 18 to 22 years old, like most of the college football players are, I think there's a feeling of they're indestructible.
Absolutely.
You may have felt that way. You might still feel that way. But it's maybe they don't, they're aware of it, and it's real to them, but mentally, I think Brian Kelly has done a good job of emphasizing that this is a maturity factor now. You still have to prepare like there's a season, and he's getting that into their mindset. But if you would have heard then, as a player, what you hear now, is that something that could psychologically affect you as far as, boy, are we really going to have a season, or, boy, are we really in danger as far as contracting this type of virus?
Yeah, I could probably assure you that most college football players are, and it wouldn't even be close, they're more concerned with whether they're going to get a chance to play ball or not over the virus. I mean, you could survey. I mean, hell.
It's all over their social media. I mean, all the kids are like, man, I'll wear whatever visor, whatever helmet if I can play football. They'll do anything.
So, and that's, again, like, I mean, you're affecting, it's just there's so many layers to it, but it's like, you know, this is a lot of kids. This is their one shot. Imagine if this was your league, your last year before you were draft eligible, like, you know, and it's literally going to get taken away from you, that opportunity. So I don't think the kids, listen, we play football. We run into each other. It's a very unnatural thing to do, what football players do, to run into each other with your eyes open and hit somebody with your eyes open. It's not natural. And we all accept that risk. And anybody that's got, like, you know, bad knees or a bad hip or a bad back or whatever, to a man, they would all say, what? I would do it again in a heartbeat. All of them. So I don't think players are, I don't think the players are concerned with any risk at all. So that indestructibility mentality you mentioned, Lou, like, yeah, you need that to play that sport at a high level. Because if you think about you're getting hurt, you're going to play a little bit slower, and inevitably that's how you do get hurt. So it sucks, man.
Mike, how hard is this on players right now? I mean, they miss spring ball, right? I mean, at least in Notre Dame's case, they only had one spring practice March 5th. The rest of it's wiped out.
Sure.
And then you get into your summer, and I mean, they didn't get on campus at a normal time. It's much later than usual, right, Lou? About 3 weeks or so?
A little bit. So the summer, the voluntary workouts began June 22nd. That's usually about the right time. But just the fact that after that March 5th practice, they went on spring break, and then they weren't together again until about 3.5 months later.
So those things, and now, Mike, it's July. Season starts in 6 weeks, and you're not even sure if you have a season.
All I can tell you, if the kids are working out, they've got to figure out a way, and I don't know, they might have to dance around some sort of rules, and this is every program, but like your summer conditioning is just straight up running. It's lifting and it's running. It's conditioning, down and back, down and back. So if I was a head coach, I would really try and work with my strength staff to weave in some sort of football, almost like practice into, because the coaches can't be there. The actual coaches can't be there. Wide receiver coach can't be there for summer conditioning. But how can I work with my strength staff to develop some sort of conditioning drill that almost works in route running, etc.? So you're going to get a little bit more of that spring in terms of technique, one-on-one individual improvement time, and maybe work that into the summer plans. That would be some sort of a workaround. But depth is going to be a huge thing in general, because kids are going to get hurt. You're going to see a lot more, I would assume, soft tissue injuries without all this conditioning. It just, mindful conditioning, mindful workouts that they've all been missing. And then if you sprinkle in some COVID cases on your team, assuming you're going to remove that kid. Oh, it's also interesting too, guys. Quarantine used to mean, I think by definition, I've yet to look it up, but like if you're actually sick, you go into quarantine. So somehow we changed the meaning of the word. It was healthy people were now quarantining themselves, right? But that's not what it means. Like by definition, it's a sick person gets quarantined. But if you quarantine somebody on a team that's actually contracted the virus, shit, that could be your starting quarterback. So depth is going to matter because of those injuries and because of, again, the COVID. I saw some teams, like a couple SEC programs, had like 20, 30, cases or kids that tested positive for it. And to me, with that herd immunity thing, I was like, that's a good thing. Get it out of the way. So now I can rely on that kid. That kid's got it. Perfect. I can rely on him all season. He's not going to get sick.
Clemson had 37.
That's what I thought. I didn't want to throw out that number, but
And Notre Dame.
Is that a conspiracy? Do we just find a conspiracy, Lou? Clemson had 37. Maybe they're encouraging them to go out and get it. I don't know. They'll be healthy all season now. What do we have? 6 or something?
One.
That's
so. I asked you guys. I asked my pod mates here. Is Clemson having had 37 kids show up? Is that a good thing versus Notre Dame having 1 kid show up? Which scenario is better, Clemson's or Notre Dame's?
Well, part of it is we don't know everything about the virus yet. So
you're dancing, Mike. You're dancing, buddy.
That's the truth. That's the truth. I've read some articles where it's like if you get it, you're less likely to get it again than others where it's like we're not sure about that yet. So I know the answer you're looking for is Clemson's in a better spot, but I'm not sure we have that definitive answer yet.
But
did any of those 37 kids die, by the way?
No hospitalizations. I haven't heard of one.
They didn't even go to the hospital.
Not that I've heard. I don't think any football players have that I've
that's hard data. So what are we talking about? So 37 kids got it. They didn't even go to the hospital. They're fine.
But at the same time now, you have programs such as Ohio State hitting the pause button on their summer workouts. Maryland did the same. North Carolina. So that's I think where in the last week the momentum really started picking up as far as nationally the opinion seems to be that there may not be any football at all this year. And that's when the Pete Thamel column came out and ESPN with Paul Feinbaum and everyone saying maybe 25% chance, etc. So
it's almost like it's almost like if you're upset at some company because of X or Y, like the best you can do as a consumer is to boycott said company, right? Sometimes that's all you can do to show your disapproval of X. So like, I don't know, we're all consumers. I don't know. I just like to, if the country is going to be upset about missing the NFL, missing college football, that's not good for the fabric of the country. So people should do their best to speak out. And I don't know what that means, but like, it's not good for the country. Truly, man. It's America's game now to not have sports and everybody just be sitting in their houses stewing. It's not good. So, I think those kids could. We live in a world. You could come up with some amazing, creative, borrow from the XFL, spice up the broadcast. You could do a lot of things without having fans in the stands. I think that's a bigger concern. But if we can test these kids, however often, and the kids are healthy that are going to play, you got to prove to the NCAA or whomever that they're healthy. And why wouldn't you play if everybody's healthy? Why wouldn't you play?
Well, because not everyone is going to be healthy. And when a school such as Ohio State hits the pause button, then I think that's when the eyebrows are raised. If it would have been like.
So is Ohio State going to have, are they going to have a school semester? Like the regular student body, are they going to be on campus?
I'm not aware with Ohio State. I know Notre Dame, that's the plan here and it starts August 10th.
Now, is that just because we're a private institution, Lou, or is that, you know what I mean, versus being a state-funded deal?
No, I think it's just something that they feel it would be the right thing to do. They're confident in what they've put in and how they're approaching it. And so far, you've seen it. It's been working well, but a lot of people also think it's a house of cards where it could suddenly just topple.
I just feel like, guys, that, like, if there's data, it's going well. This is going well. This is going pretty well. This isn't as bad as we thought it was going to be. Like, why can't we look at that then versus the house of cards aspect? So is it half full, half empty? Like, look at it as a half full thing.
You're going to have both sides. And that's why the country's probably a little bit split right now.
I think that like even me, there's so much going on and there's so much you're bombarded with outside of your day-to-day work and your day-to-day relationships. I think as we get closer and closer and closer, people start wanting to draft their fantasy football teams, et cetera, make travel plans to go to games. I think I would like to imagine that there's going to be some dissension or some maybe anger bubbling up. Like, what the hell's going on? Like, we don't get football. That's my take on it. I just think people should look at it as a more positive thing, that the numbers aren't that bad. Break down the deaths, because we're talking about dying. We're not talking about getting sick. Hopefully, because then even people that get sick don't even show symptoms. It just seems, the whole thing has seemed silly to me, but I'll be very upset if we don't get, football this season. It's not going to be good. What if you had a bunch of people in like pro sports jerseys, like protesting and rioting? Wouldn't that be hilarious?
Would be. So Mike, you want that football season canceled? Then you feel strongly about it? No football?
Absolutely not. We got to save everybody. I know there's a lot of elderly people that play college football. I've looked in the stands oftentimes, and it's filled with 80-plus-year-olds. So yeah, we gotta. Those are the folks that are going to be affected most, and clearly the elderly in college football, they're like one and the same, essentially.
I'm sensing sarcasm, Mike, just a little bit.
Yeah, you're good. We've done enough of these now.
Just a little bit. Shifting gears a little bit, Mike. So, like Lou mentioned, Pac-12's gone conference only. Big Ten conference only. So there's 3 games off Notre Dame's schedule. So now, Notre Dame was trending on Twitter last week because people were saying, well, when Notre Dame's schedule, when everyone goes conference only, it was that meme of Will Smith looking around the Full House. I don't know if you guys have seen that, but the ACC has been pretty firm in saying that we're Notre Dame's going to be good. And Brian Kelly on ESPN on Wednesday said, we're not worried about games. We got our phones ringing off the hook. People want to play us. So not worried about Notre Dame filling up the schedule. But question here is, if Notre Dame is a full member of the ACC this year and Notre Dame could play in the ACC championship game, that'd surely be interesting. But for you as a former player, how would you feel if Notre Dame went and joined the ACC for football? Obviously, they're there in every other sport, Lou. So if they were there in football,
and hockey is in Big Ten because of the smaller number, but it's a partial member, and it already has 6 ACC games on the schedule this year.
Yeah. So now, Mike,
fill it out.
So Mike, how do you feel?
Yeah, I think from a player's perspective, again, kids that pick Notre Dame go there. I hope to win a national championship. That was my belief when I committed as a kid. But the shitty part about being an independent is, like, if you lose a game, your chances of making it at that time into the BCS was like minimal. And forget losing 2 games. So I do love the conference aspect. If it's a Power 5 conference, sorry to bore you, Mike. I saw that. He's yawning over there. But so even, I guess it's nice if you do lose a game, you can still win your conference and still get into the playoff. So the stakes are so high when you're at Notre Dame playing, because they're like, yeah, man, I can't lose this game. If I do, then what if you lose your second game of the season? Then like, oh, well, shoot, there goes our chances of winning a national championship as a player kind of go out the window. So it just changes your approach. You're a human being. You're a young person. So I think it's a good thing. I crystal ball, I could see it. It'd be hard for us to probably jump into the ACC and then jump back out. I do think it kind of makes sense, if not just for that specific reason, that if you do happen to lose a game, you win your conference, boom, now we're in still.
So when you were a recruit, was part of the allure for Notre Dame or any of it, hey, we're independent, we get to make our own schedule, even though schedules are pretty much filled out years in advance, but did that play any?
I wasn't that bright. Like, I didn't consider that kind of stuff, but I did. I know when I went on a lot of those, like All-American trips, like they had some ESPN show when Reebok was still a thing. They had broadcast, and I was hanging out all week in Chicago with all these All-Americans, and most of those kids were going to the SEC, and they talked about the SEC as much as, you know, the school that they were going to. Like, man, I'm going to play in the SEC. And, you know, I didn't at that point, I didn't realize that. Up until that point, I didn't really realize how much conference mattered, in particular the SEC, and kind of the pride that's associated with it. Lou, what is like the historical tie between Notre Dame and the ACC? Like, what's the backstory there? Why not say the Big Ten, like geographically speaking?
Well, they were looking at the Big Ten, but it was a deal breaker when the Big Ten said, yeah, you can join, but you have to be full football. The ACC indicated, yeah, we'd love to have you, and we'll acquiesce, and you can be partial football member. Yeah, that was the stipulation, is that, okay, you can join, you can maintain your independent status, but you still have to play us like 4 to 6 times a year.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the trade-off, and so both sides win. The ACC gets Notre Dame, a marquee school, to help bolster its reputation in a number of areas there, and Notre Dame maintains its football independence, which is sacred. But I think in another important aspect of the ACC is that from a recruiting standpoint, you've got the Northeast territory represented with Pittsburgh, Boston College, Syracuse. So you can sell that. You have the Mid-Atlantic area with the 4 Carolina schools, as well as Virginia, which, you know, those areas have become more of hotbeds for Notre Dame as well. And
Sure.
then just very important, Georgia's become a very prominent recruiting state for Notre Dame. In both 2018 and 19, they signed 3 players apiece from Georgia, which was the most representation from any state. So you have Georgia Tech in there, and then you have Florida State and then Miami representing Florida. So there's a broad base, whereas if you're in the Big Ten, you're going to be viewed as more provincial, that you're a Midwest type thing, even though that stretches all the way from Nebraska to Rutgers as well, and Maryland. Mm-hmm. But I think overall, just from an academic standpoint, a fit standpoint, and a recruiting aspect, that the ACC is more appealing. And of course,
I would agree too. Yeah. And I think even the style, like sometimes it's difficult to watch Big Ten football. Like if you're a traditionalist, sure, but it's a little bit more opened up style of ball. Guys seem to fly around a little bit more, a little bit better weather. So it's a good fit. I think as a player, that's probably something, if you, I don't know, ask them to stack rank what's important to a kid that's being recruited by Notre Dame or picking. I don't know if them being an independent would be in the top 10. I don't.
Yes. I tend to agree. I think years ago, 20, 30 years ago, when Notre Dame also had the NBC contract in 1990, all these selling points is you're on national television every week, and we're independent. We play all over the country.
Yeah, it's a different landscape.
Yeah, and Notre Dame was a regular contender for the national title too. But now everyone's pretty much on national television regularly. They have their own.
Well, shit, Lou, TV. How many people even watch TV versus watching it on some app or some other different platform? I mean, yeah, it's a different world, and I don't know what that revenue would look like. I mean, maybe you adopt more fans by broadening your. If you get into account, maybe you bring more fans and more revenue in that way versus losing a bit of TV revenue. You know, again, I'm not that bright. I think it's a good move. We'll see what it looks like coming out of it if we even get a chance to play. But yeah, you want those Florida kids. So if you go down there, you beat up on Miami, you beat up on Florida State, and you can start snatching up some of those kids. That's a good thing.
Lou, are we just talking about this for the sake of fun, or because, I mean, probably zero chance this happens? Maybe it's just temporary for this year and it just goes back to independent.
And you can't make a long-term decision such as going to the ACC full-time based on a short-term problem like the pandemic right now. I mean, this too shall pass someday. Maybe it doesn't seem like it now, but this too shall pass. And then you look back and say, boy, why did we go so soon? Down the road, yeah, I think it's something that Notre Dame continuously has to think about. You really try to avoid using the words always or never, such as we'll never go to a conference.
Lou, what's funny about that? I learned about that in a writing class at Notre Dame. Don't use definitives, yeah.
Exactly. So, by the time 2030 rolls around, who knows? Who would have thought going into the 2010s that, Nebraska, Rutgers, and Maryland are going to be in the Big Ten, and that
it's silly.
West Virginia's in the Big 12, and Texas A&M and Missouri in the Southeast Conference, and Colorado and Utah in the Pac-12. So it's the landscape is constantly changing, and you've got to roll with it. Nobody, I think, wants to be the athletic director who says at Notre Dame, yeah, we're joining a conference in football, but I think that's something that they have to be mindful of at all times.
Well, I wrote a piece at some point about, I think it was about having a Jumbotron in the stadium. This is years ago. But Notre Dame's got so many traditions, and they're so awesome. I mean, there's dozens of them, at least a couple dozen traditions specifically related towards football. But what my argument was in this piece that I wrote, and again, with the Jumbotron, Notre Dame's biggest tradition is what? Notre Dame football's biggest tradition is Mike Singer. Winning. Yes?
Yes.
None of these traditions, none of this stuff would ever matter. The painting of the helmets, nobody would ever care if Notre Dame hadn't won, right? So joining a conference, changing the end zone, putting a Jumbotron helps you recruit better, you name it. And like, we can't paint the end zones, like we're ruining a tradition. But if that helps us recruit more kids and by default win more games, so if we join a conference and it helps you get to the playoff games, and you get a better shot at winning, isn't that what, again, Notre Dame football is all about, is winning?
Yeah.
Anybody?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. That sums it up. That's the best tradition of all. And look, nobody was more innovative than Newt Rockne. I mean, he built the stadium at a time when you had the Great Depression coming around and all, and it's like, it's going to be the white elephant on the campus. What are you doing this for? He created all kinds of innovations, and he was always thinking ahead. And his pupil, Frank Leahy, when everyone was running the old Notre Dame box, he went to the T formation. He was one of the first because he said, this is the future. Mm-hmm. And so we talk about tradition all the time, and that's wonderful, but not at the expense of progress.
Sure. Yeah. Logically, if you can draw a semi-straight line between joining a conference, winning a conference, going to the playoff, which I think is a fairly easy line to draw, versus losing one game or playing a close game and then you're getting potentially bounced out of that opportunity. So it makes sense to me. So we'll see.
It depends on the schedule too. Like back in 2017, Notre Dame lost the second game of the year to Georgia, 20-19. But in November, it was 8-1 and ranked number 3 in the country, and it still had a top 10 Miami team and a ranked Stanford team. So if they win those games, they're in the playoff even with one loss because they played a really strong schedule. Ended up with 4 teams that finished ranked. Now there's other years like last season where you could win the last 6 games, but they didn't mean much because they were not against very good opponents. That's why Notre Dame only moved from like number 16 to number 11 at the end because the opposition wasn't as strong.
Yeah. So, early losses don't hurt as much as a late loss does. But again,
except for Alabama.
Sure.
And that conference championship game helps so much, especially when Notre Dame's sitting idle.
Yeah, and that's recruiting fodder too, right? I mean, if you think, again, going back into the mind of a 16-year-old stud football recruit, you sit down to watch TV that weekend and Notre Dame's in your top 5 or top 10 or whatever as the case may be. And then the teams that you're watching play are the best teams that given weekend. And we're just sitting at home twiddling our thumbs. You're sort of out of that conversation for a while, right? Until you get a chance to play in the playoffs or a bowl game. So,
And the thing I get tired of is when and look, I'm part of the old guard too. I mean, I'm in my late 50s, and the attitude is Notre Dame doesn't play for conference championships. It plays for national championships. Well, how's that working out the last 31 years? You know, I mean, from 1964 through 80, there's a 17-year period where Notre Dame was in contention for the national title on the last day of the season 9 times. And they won it 3 of those times. And in 88 through 93, they were on the final day of the season 4 out of 6 times. For the last 26 years, you 19 of those, you already had a second loss by November. So it's like, where are you headed here?
I don't know. Just again, Mike, you opened up the question. What would you think as a player?
Mm-hmm.
Kids want to compete. Kids want to win. So it's like, okay, well, hell yeah, I can go win a conference championship. And I can go compete for a national championships. And I have 2 scenarios where I can go win. And then I can go win an award. I can be an all ACC player, first team. Like, I think it's from a player's perspective, I think it's all good. I truly do. So,
I mean, how many times is it like you have a one-loss team who's playing in a conference championship game versus the one-loss team who is not, and who usually gets into those playoff scenarios? It's the team who just won a conference championship, unless I'm mistaken, and that's probably happened. Alabama probably got in, right? Didn't they?
They got it without even having to play in a conference championship.
Well, that's the Alabama Invitational, so there's an asterisk there. But Mike, you fired up, man? What else you want to talk about? I'm surprised. I wasn't sure where you guys were going to land on this, but both are pretty let's have Notre Dame join a conference. Like,
I'm not saying just do it because there's a pandemic going on right now and you do it hastily.
None of what we've talked about here we haven't even talked about the pandemic in 15 minutes. We're just talking about any normal year.
I think there's a knee-jerk reaction sometimes about, no, you got to join a conference now and everything. Don't make a hasty decision. Just think it through and don't base it on the emotion of the short term. I don't have an objection, as maybe I might have had 5-10 years ago, about going to a conference.
Well, Joe Lou, could I ask you this briefly? What's the single biggest reason that Notre Dame has stayed an independent?
I think the ability to control the schedule as far as going all over the country, being able to schedule USC and Stanford on the West Coast.
It's not money. Well,
there's money too, but there's money involved in conferences as well. Notre Dame's got the NBC contract, but you make money also from conference contracts as well. I think it's the ability to just be able to dictate some things on your own terms.
As a player, we always
plays a role in everything. Money plays a role in everything.
Money is why we're doing this podcast.
Well, you guys are getting paid to be here.
You're our good return guest.
I think I always looked at it as because kids is like what was the year, Lou? Kids always look at it. Kids, and I'm saying players on the team always look at it through like semi-selfishly, but how much money we're worth to the school, because it is kind of like strange, right? But what year was it? I think it was 2002 when Glenn Earl blocked the field goal against Air Force. Or was that
2000? Yeah.
Okay, so it was Glenn. So then because of that, in a roundabout way, you could connect the dots better than myself. But like, we got paid, like the school made like $13 million to go to that BCS game that year or something to that effect. And then so everybody on the team for like a year called Glenn the $13 million man because he blocked that kick. So because, I mean, the kids, they know that money's involved. I always looked at it as a player that the reason that we weren't independent is because we got the money from NBC. Again, not that bright, didn't think about traveling out to SC, making your own schedule. It was more about the financial piece.
Yeah, and the financial piece, definitely 30 years ago too, to be able to negotiate that NBC contract and have the windfall that you did financially from that, those all played tremendous factors into it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the money's becoming big for everyone right now.
Yeah, except the three of us.
Certainly.
So what else you got, Mike? You got anything else? Anything else going on?
I don't. I think we covered everything I wanted for us to talk about, unless you guys have anything pressing that you want to discuss. What else is in the mind?
Did you guys, I was on vacation, but did you guys ever get into Buchner and his Elite 11 experience, etc.? Do we have time to get into that?
Yeah, I'd like to hear your take on that, because I know in the coaches in the past here sometimes would be upset about, are we judging kids on 7-on-7 without pads work and everything else like that? Or are we going to judge them by how they play on a football field? So I'd be interested in your take, because Tyler's probably going to plummet a little bit in the standings because he didn't rate as well in the Elite 11.
So, Mike, you were there, right? I saw some of your tweets where you didn't have a great opportunity to see a whole lot.
Saw every throw, but it wasn't the greatest.
You weren't up close and personal.
Wasn't up close and personal, but I mean, front row of the stands at a high school.
So for those like that aren't initiated into this Elite 11, like what's it in, again, 30 seconds? What's the breakdown of how the Elite 11 works?
Yeah, so there's 20 quarterbacks invited. There's an MVP who was Caleb Williams, who's now committed to Oklahoma, and then after him there's an Elite 11. So then there's 8 kids who are just Elite 11 finalists but not in the Elite 11, and they said it's 50% based on how you performed during the week in terms of being placed in the Elite 11 and MVP. 50% based on how you performed, and then 50% based on film, which would say, well, why the heck does film matter? And their response is the Elite 11 is a year-long competition. So Buchner was in the Elite 11.
So the film, could you split the film down the middle, 25% junior year, 25% senior year?
Well, no, they're not seniors yet. So it's just 50% film in general. No, for this Elite 11, we're going to break down your film. And Trent Dilfer told me afterwards, Buchner's got like the best tape I've ever seen, which those guys, they say that about everybody. So I didn't
He's such a blowhard. Dilfer's such a blowhard.
So Buchner didn't have the greatest week, but they loved his junior tape so much that he still was in that Elite 11.
So what was he struggling with most that week that you saw?
My opinion, and everyone's a quarterback guru, because I mean, I missed a couple of his throws on video the first day, but every other throw I got on video, so you can look on our YouTube page, Blue Gold Illustrated. For me, it was, and this is my second time seeing him. I saw him March 1st in LA at a Rivals camp. He didn't seem to be throwing with any of his lower body. It was just pushing it with his arm. People are talking about he's throwing side arm and a little bit 3/4. He's always done that. I've always seen him throw like that. So I didn't really understand the outrage about that from people, but he lacked some velocity on the ball because I just didn't feel like he was using any of his legs. And if anything, it's actually kind of impressive, some of the throws he'd make just with his arm, because he's not using his lower body. But when he had, in my opinion, the best throw of the entire week. When
you sent me that film.
Yeah, he stepped up in the pocket, rolled up a little bit right, and chucked the ball 48 yards downfield on a dime, because it was more natural to him because he jumped up a little bit when he threw it, because he's using all of his body to throw that 48-yard pass pretty much on a rope.
Which is so yeah. So like my take on this, all this stuff's great, right? And it's good experience for those kids, but like, there's quarterback gurus on there. There's a guy that I kind of know, that I guess worked with Pat Mahomes, Jeff Christensen's his name. He runs a deal in Chicago called Throw It Deep Academy.
Mm-hmm.
And they'll have them going through the steps, right? And like, you know, the progressions and the over the top motion and snapping your hips and all those things. But then you turn on the TV on Sundays, you got Kyler Murray playing backyard ball, Baker Mayfield playing backyard ball, Pat Mahomes playing backyard ball, Mitch Trubisky's playing backyard. I mean, like, so you take all the fundamentals that these kids are ranked off of, and then when you actually put on the games, those kids are – Johnny Manziel's winning a Heisman Trophy doing stuff that you would never teach a kid. So how much stock are we going to put in someone's motion? And I said that Buchner does have kind of a strange delivery. That was more of a long delivery to me. But I don't put a ton of stock into it. That throw that you showed me. And then the other thing too, like when you think about football and a pocket collapsing around a kid, yet they're not always going to get a chance to step into a throw. So accuracy to me has always been vastly more important than velocity in terms of the quarterback position. People get hard-ons over how hard a kid throws, how fast he throws a ball. And again, dude, having watched that end zone copy, you got to be able to put that ball here right now. So
I don't think Joe Burrow's got the strongest arm. Kyler Murray. I mean, a lot of these guys. I mean, Baker, you mentioned, doesn't have the strongest arm in the world. Kyler might actually have a really strong arm, but he's not a prototypical guy. So yeah, I think.
No, he doesn't. He doesn't have a big enough hand to have a strong enough arm. I mean, you need to be able to grab a ball. Like Josh Allen, big dude, quarterback for the Buffalo Bills. Like he's got the strongest arm in the NFL.
Yeah.
And he's got probably a massive hand. He can just spin that ball. You know.
I wrote going into the week that whether he does absolutely amazing or does not do good, there's no really reason to raise your stock on, Buchner's so much better. I love him so much more of a prospect based on Elite 11. Or the opposite, which is kind of what happened. He didn't do that great. Well, now I'm down on Buchner. I wrote, people, don't do this. Don't do this. And, of course, people are doing it. So
what matters? I mean, again, everything. The only thing that truly matters is what happens on the field on Saturdays or Thursdays or whenever the games are played. Like Lamar Jackson, I watched because I have no life. We've documented this. You know, I watched the combine. Like I watched the whole thing. I'll record it. Like I watched Lamar Jackson's combine workout, and it was brutal, dude. Like ducks, like terrible. And I was like, yeesh. And then he ends up getting drafted at the end of the first round. Now he's like essentially MVP runner-up in the NFL. And he couldn't hit the blinds out of a barn coming out of college, having won a Heisman, and he still couldn't throw a ball. But look what he's doing. He's winning football games. So,
and it is interesting that both of you referenced Buchner's technique or throwing motion, because that was kind of a sticking point with Phil Jurkovec as well. As soon as he came in, it's like, oh boy, that's kind of an unorthodox motion. And, Phil even admitted that people have been, looking at his throwing motion all the time. And sometimes it can get into your head too, when people start talking about this or try to alter that and all. So I don't know if we're going to have a repeat here with Tyler about, as far as the technique or the.
I don't know, man. I've never met the kid. Mike, you've been around him long enough, but like Jurkovec's performance, he's kind of spazzed out, right? Kind of spazzed out. Like he was, like you said, maybe he's overthinking things because he's trying to adjust the way. I don't see that being. I think when Buchner's at his best, he's playing loose. He's having fun. He's got a little bit of moxie. Do you agree with that, Mike?
Yeah, I want to interrupt you there because this is the first time throwing motion's ever been really brought up. I've talked to people.
I mentioned it once before.
You did?
Yeah, a little different, but yeah, like when I talked to his, a quarterback trainer out in California that I've talked to, and like this is the first concern, like after Elite 11. I'm not worried about that. I think Notre Dame's going to Notre Dame might not even take care of it. That might fix itself. Because I went back and watched. I mentioned when I saw him in LA March 1st. I went back and watched that and compared it to Elite 11. he looked fantastic at the Rivals camp. Again, I talked about the lower leg. When he was throwing at the Elite 11, you would just see his right foot plant and it wouldn't move. Both of his feet, when he's throwing it, they just stand. They just don't move at all. But at the Rivals camp, you can see his right foot is following through when he's throwing the ball.
But we talked about this before, but like the throwing motion. So I've ran into Sage Rosenfels at a bar here in Omaha. He happens to live here, I think, part-time, but he was working
with
Ian Book this offseason. So I sat down next to him and we started talking football, and then come to find out he played in the NFL for like 10 years. But because he's kind of an unassuming guy. But we were talking about that in terms of the throwing motion where, traditionally guys step into that throw. That's why they wear that big left knee brace, right-handed quarterback. They step into that throw and they sort of snap their hip. Whereas now he's like, again, pass rushers are getting so good, pockets are getting so confined that people are standing there and they're just snapping the hip without the step because they don't have the real estate in that pocket to make that step throw. So maybe that's what our boy's trying to transition into. But I don't think his style of play is going to be served well by being kind of confined into some of those drills where you're being critiqued on
That's what I said. I also wrote before, I was like, this isn't his best setting because he's the best runner of all 20 of those quarterbacks. Dude ran for 31 touchdowns last year. But what I was saying before, Mike, is I'm not really concerned with the mechanic stuff. I'm more concerned about something you've brought up is on our podcast when we actually broke Buchner down a little bit. It was about a month ago. As you said, you're more concerned about, and I agree with you, is when he gets to Notre Dame, let's not try to make him into a pocket quarterback. Like, this kid is at his best when he gets outside the pocket. Like I said at Elite 11, he wasn't that good in the pocket, but he made the best throw of the entire week when he got out and just put that ball on a rope 50 yards down.
And I've said that as it pertains to Ian Book as well.
Yep.
Like, it's part of his game. And again, man, and maybe I'm just, too much of an ex-player, but like, what am I good at? Let me do that.
Yep.
So it's like, well, then if you wanted me to do this, then why did you recruit me? So like, I understand you want me to stay in my pocket, but if one isn't there, 2, 1.5, 2 isn't there, like, I'm gone, man. I'm getting 7 yards.
Yeah. We don't ask me to write
football guys.
We don't ask me to write historical pieces, and we don't ask Lou to write a bunch of recruiting pieces. Like, we do what we're good at, and I think it pertains to football as well. Like, you got to let the athletes be themselves.
And again, all those guys like Da Vinci, I think one of the very first podcasts we had, it's like, you let your athletes, you let your dogs go eat. And he's an electric running back. It's almost just calling him a running back.
Yeah,
he looks at times like a running back.
Yeah.
So
he's 6'2", 210. I mean, it's a great size.
Inevitably, if the kids got good wiring upstairs, this will serve as a motivational thing. Again, I think having chips on your shoulders when you're a high-profile recruit and being able to maintain a chip on your shoulder and a little bit of fire in your belly will serve you well. So,
yeah. All right, guys, I think we have exhausted our time here.
Well, I'm exhausted, Mike.
I'm in my house. This is my first – for those watching on YouTube, I'm recording in my house. I got very empty walls here, but no more.
Congrats on that, by the way.
Thank you. Yes, now in debt. So
you'll get the lawn looking good, too.
Yes. It's actually it's not looking too bad. I'd show you guys. But, so no more – my wife is sitting next to me. She's got to be quiet. I can actually be in just a different room recording the podcast. So we will start to ramp up the frequency of the Irish Huddle podcast here, getting into weekly podcasts once we roll into August. The Notre Dame football team is going business as usual. So are we at blueandgold.com. Make sure you use promo code Irish60. Go to blueandgold.com, enter that promo code in. It's hard to go on the site and not see links to sign up for our site, premium membership to discuss Notre Dame football and recruiting on Rockneys Roundtable, our premium message board, get all that insider recruiting nuggets. Even last week we had some insider nuggets on what's going on with the team and how those voluntary workouts were going. Several true freshmen had been standing out, including quarterback. Throw that out there. So that's going to do it for this episode of the Irish Huddle. Thank you guys so much for listening.